Hello and welcome to this Google Plus Hangout. I'm Stephen Pritchard, journalist and broadcaster. This is the first of 3 sessions that we'll be running over the next few months looking at Google Plus Hangouts and how they can be used in broadcasting. In this session that we're going to cover off a few things. We're going to cover the basics of Hangouts and Hangouts on Air. We're going to cover some of the key controls that you can use to make your Hangouts run more smoothly. And we're going to cover off the technology involved to set up a broadcast quality Hangout and some of the ways that you could use a Hangout on Air for your organization or news channel. Google Plus is of course Google's social network, but what's of most interest to us here is the Hangout video chat function and especially Hangouts on Air. Hangouts on Air take the basics of the Hangout video chat, which is similar to, for example, Skype, and let you broadcast them. The neat thing is that it takes that video chat and also streams it out to your YouTube channel. You can do this directly from your own Google Plus profile, your personal profile, or you could launch it from a Google Plus page, one for example linked to your program or publication or company. Then the YouTube video is recorded for later playback. You can embed and share that in all the usual ways. You can also download and edit them. In the interest of time, I'm not going to cover the whole process setting up the Hangouts in too much detail. There's plenty of information about that on the internet. And of course, we're also going to put up an article on audiovideopro.www.audiovideopro.net with some links to that too. But it's worth running through some of the basic controls that might be useful within a broadcast. So, if I just pause for a moment. The basic controls on Hangout, of course, include being able to mute your microphone and turn off your camera. Now, what we're hoping to be able to do here is some screen sharing. So if you just bear with me for a moment, I will flip over to the other screen and hopefully be able to bring up some screen information that we recorded earlier. So we'll start the screen sharing and flip over to that. Okay, so you should now be seeing the screen sharing picture. So at the very top there, we've just got the Google Plus logo, as you'd expect. And then what's probably of most interest is on the left-hand side of the screen, there'll be a bunch of options which aren't on this grab, unfortunately. And at the top, you get a hang up the phone button, you get a bandwidth control button, you get a button for muting your microphone and muting your video. So that's, again, self-explanatory, and that's available to every participant. But if I move down a bit and go to our next screen grab, Google has added a couple of other options. So one of the ones that's quite important there is cameraman, for example. Now what the cameraman lets you do is it lets you remove these little things from the bottom of the screen that you're probably seeing on our video output here. So if I go and demonstrate that live, for example, I can go into my screen here and I can go into the cameraman app and I can check whether we are indeed broadcasting the bottom third little logos or not. I can turn those off. Now, what it actually says is broadcast the large video that I see to my audience and hide the other from the video feeds. So it's not actually totally obvious that it's the film strip that you're getting rid of, but that is indeed what it does. So that's the cameraman option. You can also use that to control how participants join and whether they control with their microphones, whether they join with their microphones switched on or off, which is again very, very useful, especially for larger groups. So that's the cameraman app there, and again the screen as I bring that up, it's pretty simple to be honest. If we skip over some of the functionality that we're not going to use, such as say the screen capture, we're going to the one that's called Control Room. So if I go on to the next one on my screen grab, what Control Room lets you do is it lets you basically, again, as it suggests, take a bit more control over the Google Plus Hangout and show different aspects of people's videos. So if I go onto my little screen captures here and click on the control room one, and it's actually brought up the controls, the main controls as well for each participant in the screen there, which is quite handy as they were missed off the previous one. But if I go onto the right hand side of the screen here, you'll see it's actually in this case both with the participants and me. I'm slightly cheating here, doing this with just a second computer set up on one of my other accounts. But you can see there I can adjust the volume, I can actually make that obviously louder or quieter, and I can also mute the video, I can mute the audio completely. I can also eject someone from the Hangout if I need to, and I can also pass over control of the Hangout to an assistant or a producer, which is something, again, that is very, very useful indeed. Now, if we continue going on down the screen, you'll see that we've got a couple more options here. So that was Control Room, and we've covered off the cameraman option as well. We then move on to something called the Google Plus Toolbox. Now, I'll talk you through that very, very quickly, and then I'm going to actually run through switching that on live as well, because it does give some improvements to the picture. So the toolbox has a whole list of functions there, that some of which you may need and some which you may not. A volume control, again, emoticons, there's a chat function there, and there's also settings. But the most important ones for creating a TV type look to your Hangout are the ability to switch on the lower third, title, or Aston as it's sometimes called, and also to put the custom overlay on. So at the very start of this program, you probably saw we had a custom overlay. That custom overlay was just a graphic, a PNG file that I prepared beforehand, and that would have been showing on the screen. Now, ideally, again, if you had a producer or an engineer with you, they would leave that on until all the presenters are queued up and ready to take part, and then that would be your signal to go live. So if I just go back out of this and into our regular controls rather than screen sharing, I'll bring up the actual toolbox and I can switch on, for example, the lower thirds, and I'll actually do that on another screen so you can see that where I'm talking to you. And I can also turn on or off that custom overlay. And I'll just go back into the final screen share, and whilst you're looking at that graphic, a little bit of delay here, I'll bring up the one for Pro Studio, which we'll touch on in a moment, and I'll just go over and do that custom overlay business on the other screen. So the final box that I'm just going to look at then is one called Pro Studio. Now, Google Plus is open to third-party developers. You can create third-party applications or plugins for Hangouts on Air, and that is quite an interesting one that's been developed. Now, the chap behind this, Chad Lafarge, is actually someone who's a regular participant in Hangouts, and he's put together some functionality that is specifically designed to help people to manage their Hangouts on Air. There's a little bit of overlap with what he's done and now what's in Google Plus's own control room, but if I just bring the screen up for you, make sure we're showing that, it is showing now, you should be able to see that Hangout on Air screen with the control room, with Pro Studio up on the right-hand side as it's facing me. So the functionality there is probably something that Chad would be better off to describe in more detail, but just to run through very quickly, you can again control the participants, you can take someone off the Hangout, you can control the audio, you can control, for example, whether you send out invitations to people, but most importantly, you can hand over the whole of this control suite to a producer, and that gives you an enormous amount of flexibility. Now, what that does is it actually mirrors on screen what the main Google Plus controls do. So, for example, if I mute my camera here, which I did on this screen grab, you'll see that it's also muted at the top there. So it's very, very flexible and certainly something that you should look at. You just click on that to download it if it's not already showing up. So I'll stop the screen sharing there and go back to the live Hangout. So now if I flip through, we should be on a different screen, and you'll see that I've added the bottom third Aston, as it's called in broadcast circles now, and you'll see there's even the logo on the screen at the bottom there as well. So that's all set now and running. So those controls do give you the ability to add that little bit of polish and zing to your production, and also to maybe say work with an engineer or a technician, an assistant or a producer. Virtual floor manager in effect is what you get with Pro Studio, for example, and it's incredibly powerful. In particular, there's an awful lot of things that you have to run through as part of Google Plus Hangout to make a Hangout on Air work professionally. And as you can see, even with this live demo, there's quite a few things that are not going quite as I would like them to do. So for example, we had to pre-record the screen grabs just so I could make sure that they would work for you, whereas in an ideal world you would have a producer or an assistant who could bring those up in real time so you could actually talk through them. So again, a very, very useful feature to be able to hand over control to another participant. You can also use some of these controls to do some very rudimentary camera switching. So one of the things that I'm going to just show you very, very quickly, again, I have to dive off to look between my screens here, but we haven't got the film strips showing at the bottom. If I go back into Cameraman, you're only seeing the large screen at the moment. I can turn that off and you'll see the little windows controlling or showing who is the participant. Now, one of those says blacked out because they're both in effect me. So I'll get rid of them as they're not particularly pretty to watch. But what they do is allow me to switch between a couple of cameras. And I will switch back over now to our webcam view. Now, most people will start off in a Google Plus Hangout with a basic webcam type setup. So again, I'm going to go back to the main camera and I'm going to actually make a small change to my settings here, and I'm going to do this live. I'm going to go into my settings and I'm going to change the camera that we're actually using for this Hangout on Air, and I'm going to flip back to that so you will see a different image in a moment. So at the moment you're looking at my main camera, which is being controlled by a computer just out of shot at the moment. I'm going to bring up the image that you would see from a standard webcam. You can see immediately that the quality is not as nice, and actually the bottom third logo has also changed to our YouTube channel screen name. So that is where most people will start. It's perfectly adequate for a video chat, but it's not really broadcast quality. In fact, it's fairly horrible to look at in the mirror image I can see in front of me. So just switch back to the main camera, and I'm going to go back into my settings. And bearing in mind I'm doing all of this live, I'm going to switch over to our other camera option. So you want something more akin to broadcast quality. What can you do? Well, the next best option perhaps is to go for an external webcam. So we've got an external webcam set up here. It's actually in front of our main camera, and I'm going to flip over to that now so you can see the broadcast coming from the webcam. And that's a nice wide shot, so it also gives you an idea of all the different bits and pieces that we've got running here in the background. You can see my cup of water there, you can probably see my phone, you can see some of the lighting that we've got here, you can see the two Macs, and you can even see my lovely big microphone there from the wide shot. But this is a standard off-the-shelf Logitech webcam. It's about $50, $60 I think in the US, maybe about £40 in the UK now. So not a very expensive thing. Even if you didn't have access to something like that, you can actually use a standard camera on an iPhone or other device, and you can use either the front or rear facing camera in, for example, an iOS device. So if that's all you had, or that's all a guest had, then actually we've done Hangouts with those and they work reasonably well, but the quality is not as good as you would get from a Pro type camera. So let's switch back over to the Pro camera then and give you that improved image again with the bottom thirds, titles and everything else. So what we've got here then is a proper broadcast camera, and I'm just clearing some of the screens in front of me to have a bit more space to work with here. What you are seeing now is an image in full HD or 720p, so that's an HD quality image. That is full HD as far as Google Plus Hangouts On Air are concerned, because that's as good as it can do right now. 720p is pretty nice. So I'm looking at this camera at the moment, and the one we're using for this particular demonstration is a Sony PMW100. That's a single chip camera that can record in the broadcast grade XDCam EX codec, but at the moment we're sitting in front of this with it running at 720p 50, because that is the maximum that Google Plus will allow us to use. Now if I flip back to our external webcam here, just so you can get the wide shot, you may be able to see some of the other equipment that we've got on the table there. So if I just bring this up to the screen here, Always Dangerous live demo, we've got an external audio interface, and we've got our streaming interface. I really probably shouldn't touch that, but let's live dangerously. I've got the streaming interface here. So the first thing, that is an HDMI to Thunderbolt interface. This particular one is called a Blackmagic Intensity Extreme. There's other ones from manufacturers such as Matrox and AJA. That is running the main video stream from our main camera. So if I flip back to that, now I'm not touching it, that is coming through that box there. That's giving you the 720p. Next in line then is the audio interface. We've got a couple of different audio options here. One is to take the audio in through the Blackmagic box. The other is to take the audio in directly through a USB interface. So that is in fact what we're using here for the audio. And again, if I flip back to the webcam and try to hold him up again, that is the M Audio. It's fairly simple. This one is now manufactured under the Avid brand. This is an older model. It's a simple one XLR input, direct monitoring. I've got a pair of headphones connected up for that, for just checking the sound. That is going over USB into the main computer, and the way it works with Google Plus Hangouts is it tends to choose the most prominent microphone. So what we've got on the other screen is we've got the sound muted on the other screen. In fact, we've got it turned off on the input, so you're not going to have a problem with it deciding to flip between microphones. But we've actually got that one muted, but we are showing the video from that camera, and we're showing the audio, or broadcasting the audio from this via the USB box. The third thing on my setup here on the desk, if I just point at it here, this is the rear view of an Atomos Ninja 2, which is an external HDMI based recorder. This is recording to a solid state drive, and this is just so I've got a high quality recording. Again, it's still 720p because that's what the camera is outputting, but a high quality version if I need to edit it and go back over that. So that is plugged in. The HDMI is going into the back of that, and then coming out of that into the Blackmagic design box, which is in front of the second computer, which is doing the streaming there. So that is our setup, reasonably straightforward. So we are also in a studio. So one thing to bear in mind is sound quality wise, vision quality wise. We've got decent lighting rig here. We've got a light on the background. We've got a couple of fluorescent type lights, continuous lights, low energy lights in front of me to light the set. And we have got a big fat soundproof door and some soundproofing on the walls as well. So that hopefully is contributing to the audio quality. So that's the rig that we've got set up here, and over the next couple of programs we're going to go into a little bit more depth about what you might want to do to improve on that. So broadcast quality camera obviously improves the image quality quite a lot, and you've seen that from the comparison shots. The next option would be to go for some form of vision mixing. I showed some very rudimentary camera switching here, and it does work, but it's a little bit awkward to achieve in an as live or live environment. So the other disadvantage to that is the amount of bandwidth it requires. At the moment we are using two computers. They are both streaming all the time, even though you're only seeing the image from one of them at the time. So that's incredibly wasteful from a bandwidth point of view. What you could do is do your switching locally. You could use an external video card. There are a couple of those on the market that can have multiple inputs, or you could have even multiple video cards if you have a tower type machine. There's some clever software that again Mr. Lafarge has put together, which lets you switch between two USB cameras in software. Or you could use a software-based vision mixer such as Telestream's Wirecast software. There's even a version of that if you have a YouTube channel with enough traffic, you will get a free version of that as well. And the final option is to go for a conventional hardware-based vision mixer, and that's what we will demonstrate in part 2 of this series alongside hopefully the Wirecast software, so you can see real-time switching. So one reason for doing that is to give a bit of polish to your programs, to have more control over the graphics, and to again put that in the hands of a vision mixer type operator, a live production director or a producer. The other is to conserve bandwidth, because then all you would be seeing is one single camera stream rather than a mix which is happening up in Google's cloud computing environment of all the different streams. So that is what we'll cover off in part 2. Now in part 3 we're going to look at some of the additional features which Google Plus is rolling out for their Hangouts on Air, in particular the way that you can have multiple participants rather than simply multiple cameras, and also how you can mix people from different environments together into the program, hand over control, manage that production, manage that broadcast so it works seamlessly, and also integrate with social media and other tools such as chat. So just to wrap up, how might you use this technology? Well, as I say, it's quite flexible. I can flip back to my wide camera here, for example. You can use this, for instance, to do a quick live stream from a live event, for example, interviews from the floor of a conference. You could set this up quite simply, a couple of cameras, maybe even just a webcam, as we were demonstrating right now. Set that up in your conference venue and broadcast live using that. That's very, very straightforward. You could use this to add a live stream, even with just a simple single camera setup, whether that's a broadcast camera or a webcam, to, for example, a live event or a video that you're planning to record on site, so a Q&A or a roundtable, for example. You could give people the option who can't attend in person to watch a Hangout on Air stream via YouTube. Again, very, very powerful. You could set up an event specifically for Hangouts on Air. A couple of organisations doing that. Huffington Post, for example, is doing that. The Guardian's been doing that as well, doing some live Q&A type programmes with their journalists and guests and broadcasting those out over Hangouts on Air. You could use this again in addition to your existing productions. So you could take an existing Q&A or roundtable, you could be recording that in separate camera channels for later broadcast and later editing, and you could create a single channel if using a vision mixer, or from a single camera as what's called an ISO channel, just send a clean feed out to Hangouts on Air and put specific Hangouts on Air graphics on it using the tools that we've demonstrated. Again, the flexibility, you're recording the high quality video on your video cameras on location, and then you're creating a stream going up to Google Plus Hangouts on Air with custom logos specifically for people viewing in that environment. So there's quite a lot you can do. You could also use this for training in education, for example, and potentially you could use Google Plus Hangouts on Air to replace technologies such as Skype or expensive and dedicated remote camera links for people who you want to appear on your broadcast program, because now, of course, you can record this. You can also set the Hangout on Air to private, which, for example, would stop people just watching on YouTube a segment which you intended to insert into a broadcast program later. That, though, brings us to the end of this first session. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I hope you've been able to roll with some of the little technical glitches that always seem to crop up in these things. In our next program, say we'll look at multi-cameras and multi-cameras in one location. In our third, we'll look at multiple guests in multiple locations and the role of the producer, as well as social media and interactivity. All that remains now is for me to thank Touchdown Studio Space for letting us do this broadcast from there, Audio Video Pro, which will be doing the write-up on this later on, and of course, thank you for taking part and watching. My name's Stephen Pritchard. Thanks again.